Well, congratulations on having this many people out on a Friday afternoon. Carol, wherever you are, remember when we sat down before this was a reality and talked about this? I was a newspaper reporter for the Mountain Democrat at the time, and we did a little story in support of the launch. And look at it all these years later, surviving past the pandemic. Way to go, guys. The quest for learning goes on. If you're here today, there's a good chance that you are a taphophile. That's T-A-P-H-O-P-H-I-L-E. What does that mean? That means somebody who has a peculiar fondness for old cemeteries. I am a card-carrying taphophile, so much that I'm a taphophiliac and have to attend 12-step meetings. Haha. What follows here is a bunch of editorial commentary. I'm stating these things as if they're facts, but they're really my opinions. But I've had some experience now, and I've got anecdotal evidence to back up the fact that our neglected old cemeteries can connect us to the place we live. They can connect us to our history, and in doing so can connect us to each other. Come on, baby. No? Am I what? There we go. All right. Here's how I say it works. Humans are wired to internalize stories. Actually, kind of wired to internalize pictures, it turns out, the way the brain works. But we connect them, and our brains like connecting them, and we make stories. The stories stick with us. They influence us. They breed familiarity. They breed connections to people and to places. The more stories we know, the more we feel connected. Cemeteries are full of stories, but how do you know them? I love old cemeteries, and I went crazy. You look at the headstone, they died in 1879. How? What was their life like? What were they like? What is it? So these stories have to be coaxed out of our cemeteries. And this is why signage is important. As simple as it is, simple signs placed in front of a grave in the cemetery solve bunches of problems. So one of the big things Save the Graves does is post signs. Of course, somebody has to research them and write them and send them to Minuteman Phil and then talk El Dorado High School into building steel stands to mount them on and then get some volunteers together to stick them in the ground and all that. But that's the kind of stuff we do. Cemeteries force us to ask questions. Who was this person? What was their life like? How did they die? Who did they leave behind? All these things, if we can learn them, build connections to the person that's in the ground, to the place we live, and eventually to each other. Hit it, Michelle. I believe that network of connections creates the fabric of community. Somebody else probably said that first, but I like it. I've been going with it, and I believe it. A strong fabric is a strong community. It translates directly into quality of life. It makes us more tolerant, more compassionate, more resilient, less divisive. It makes us better. The people that we're working with in the cemeteries, all different politics, radically different politics, not an issue, never even comes up. It's just not what we're there about. We're there about something else. It doesn't have to be cemeteries. It could be what you guys are doing. You could say all the same things about this, but I happen to like cemeteries. All it takes to kickstart this process is an old cemetery, some research, and a little storytelling. And that's what I try to do. I do cemetery tours. Some of you have probably been on them. We do a grand theatrical event that you've already heard about. There's pictures from last year's over there. And the theatrical event is like serious theater in a horrible location. I mean, it's the worst imaginable place to stage a theatrical event that But we pull it off year after year with hiccups sometimes. But skilled actors, thoroughly researched scripts, everything's vetted by the Historical Society, so it's not some guy in a costume making stuff up. That's fine for some things, but that's not what we're after here. We want real history you can take to the bank. And so a couple years back, we realized that themed performances were more interesting to people, more connections between the various actors, because we were putting 8 actors out there standing out in the cemetery just telling their stories over and over again, the stories of the guy who's buried beneath them. And that was okay, except a lot of people couldn't get to those far reaches. So we started consolidating it and connecting all those performances. Last year it was all about one pioneering family, the Blairs. This year the theme is going to be law and order. 4 famous crimes that you probably haven't heard of that shaped El Dorado County. And it's quite dramatic. Where was I? All it takes to kickstart a little storytelling. That story can be on a small sign, a trifold brochure, a full-on theatrical production, or any of a dozen creative outlets. All right, what about those dogs, kids, and tourists? Well, it turns out that they love cemeteries too. Let's just jump, we know about dogs, jump to kids. Little kids go nuts in cemeteries. Since our cemeteries get little to no maintenance, all the dollar store plastic flowers that everybody brings out to grandma just sit out there for 4 or 5 years, getting crummier and crummier looking. One of my pet peeves, go figure. But little kids gather them up and rearrange them into bouquets and put them on somebody's grave that doesn't have any plastic flowers whatsoever. And it's, these neighborhood kids do this, and it's a beautiful thing. When they get older, and maybe some of you were these people, they would go there and do other things in the cemeteries, things like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which I'm all for those things. Just don't destroy the cemetery in the process. Fortunately, the nature of the conscious modifying substances these days that they're taking out there, they're not real violent when they're there. They're pretty mellow. So we're getting a lot of candy wrappers and soft drink cans and stuff. They're not busting up headstones. I haven't picked up a beer can in a cemetery in 3 or 4 years. They're not drinking. So there's still a little vandalism, but it's much, much better. Visitors. So anyway, these kids, trying to get them involved early. So we'll talk about projects in a minute, but we try to do group-based projects, family-based projects. I'm going to talk a lot about, we had a very successful event with the LDS Church in Placerville. We had about 75 people out there. At points, I thought 65 of them were kids. They were just running everywhere, great kids, doing the deal, cleaning headstones, doing landscape maintenance, just being awesome. And the main thing they're doing is building a connection to the cemetery so that when they get older and they're in the vandalism stage, they're not going to tear the place up, hopefully. They'll respect it because they remember being there and cleaning that headstone right there. And oh, look, it needs cleaning again. Maybe I'll do it again. So I'm all about getting kids to take ownership of this. And I've spent a lot of hours talking with stoners in that cemetery to come up with this strategy. And they're like, yeah, man, it's my place at the end of 10 minutes with me. Visitors love cemeteries. Historic tourism is on the rise. Tell me you haven't gone to some neat old little town someplace and checked out the cemetery. If you haven't, you should. They're sometimes more interesting than the towns. People come to our towns and want to check out the cemeteries, and they're like less than impressed sometimes because our cemeteries have, the maintenance budget for our cemeteries has dropped and dropped and dropped some more. It's nothing but a problem. We'll talk more about that later. Next, Michelle. This is another example of a sign. So this is something we put together. I put together this based on some articles that other people had written. You can see there at the bottom that all these other people wrote it, and I crammed it into this one sign. So this is our legendary Folsom Prison Break. 2 gunfights. Half the guys actually got away and were never caught. And we are going to tell that story from 2 perspectives, from the prison side and from the law enforcement side on October 19th. Next. All right, new arrivals and old families. Demographics in El Dorado County are shifting. Conservatives, plug your ears. We're becoming more progressive. That is happening. The new arrivals that come here for nature and history. This is surveys. This is John Hydall talking, not Mike Roberts now. And they like our cemeteries. And in our experience, they're willing to pitch in and lend a hand. If somebody else organizes some event, they'll go to it and maybe show up tomorrow at 9 a.m. and help us clean headstones. Placerville Union Cemetery, 650 B Street. The families, bigger problem. The old families that are buried in these cemeteries, a lot of them are still around. I mentioned the Blairs earlier. Geographic mobility has been a game changer. They don't live around here anymore. They're all over the country. They're all over the world. Your own kids are all over the country and all over the world. I wasn't born and raised here. So it's been harder for them to come out every Memorial Day and clean, find somebody, scrape up some family members to clean the family plot. Some still do it, but others, sadly, have given up on us. As the cemeteries became public, we'll talk more about that in a minute, about how that happened, and they were dependent on general fund money. The worst possible way to fund anything that's important is out of the general fund. If it doesn't have a dedicated funding source, good luck. So cemeteries are maintained out of the general fund, and conditions went downhill for a long time because of that. Hopefully the attention we're shining on this issue is making that harder, softening that. We're also trying to just make a difference on the ground. And we're trying to win these families back because they're important. We ended up having about 55 members of the Blair family attend our event last year. Oh, there they are. And I mean, they flew in from all over the place. I mean, a lot of these people knew very little about their family history. They didn't know that they were this dominant lumber family who, with a succession of incredibly powerful marriages, were just incredibly influential all around the region. And they dug it. They thought it was great that somebody else did all this and put on this big theatrical presentation. Several of them actually portrayed their ancestors. They came and worked for us as actors and portrayed their great-great-grandfather. Yeah, even though they weren't professional actors. So anyway, they liked it. It worked. It also helped that we were in partnership with a couple guys that recently bought the original Blair house on Cedar Ravine and remodeled it and turned it into a museum and have more or less opened it to the public, and knew all these people in the process of just being history geeks and finding out about the house they bought a couple of years ago. So we had that going for us. Let's keep going. So Save the Graves is a nonprofit. We incorporated last year, right? We're incorporate last year, buy insurance this year. It's tough. Before that, we were a fiscal sponsee. We've existed since 2019. We were a fiscal sponsee, it's called, of first Arts and Culture, El Dorado, and then later on Imagination Theater. And then we spun off on our own in order to be better able to get grants. Our mission is to restore, protect, and celebrate El Dorado County cemeteries. What doesn't that say? What's left out of that? Maintain. It's bad enough trying to recruit people to do those things. Recruiting people to weed whip and push lawnmowers and stuff is harder. I didn't want to take the public agencies that are responsible for these cemeteries completely off the hook. So that's the mission. Next. Drilling down, like my drill bit. Restore. That means repair, headstones, copings, roads. You know what a coping is? Those old stone blocky things that sometimes surround a plot and sometimes they surround a whole section. They're really cool, they're historic, and they're falling down. They have to be maintained. The fancier the cemetery in the day, the more maintenance it takes now. Parking. A lot of cemeteries, we have none. Try having an event for 700 or 800 people, and there's parking for 8 cars. So we have to shuttle them in from the high school and do all this rigmarole to get people there. Cleanup. I'm putting that in there because I want to be able to build things like that arch that you're looking at right there. That went up last year. Trees are pretty. They're bad in cemeteries. They need maintenance. Landscaping, entryways. Make the entryway pretty. It's what they see. A lot of people don't even get out of the car. So make it pretty from the road. And if they do get out of the car, try and keep them from falling down. Accessibility, the terrain in our cemeteries is just brutal. It's first or second year of Save the Graves, we had multiple El Dorado roses go down. You hate losing them, They come out in their widow weeds. You guys know what a widow weed is? It's a mourning outfit. M-O-U-R-N, a Victorian mourning gown, and they're not necessarily comfortable. So they're out here in the sun. It's 70, 80, 90 degrees in this black stuff, and now they're falling down. Oh, God. That's when we started moving the performances into more central, more accessible areas. But we've done handrails and benches, and haven't really done much with pathways. The problem is that these old cemeteries, when they filled up, there was no more plots to sell for revenue, for cash flow to maintain the cemetery. And that's when they all typically go belly up and get abandoned. Well, in our town, we had a guy named Joel Ashworth, who was a local mortician that buried half of everybody that died here in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And he was responsible for this place, and he wouldn't give up. So he got permission to sell graves in the walkways as a last-ditch attempt to keep some money coming in while he built these above-ground mausoleums. Of course, dear old Joel, who's still alive, by the way, and a good friend and mentor, he created a nightmare for us. Now we've got sinking graves in the walkways, creating an uneven terrain, and above-ground mausoleums, and hopefully, Save the Graves actually got them painted over the last 2 days. Hopefully they finish today. But a bunch of stuff that now has to be maintained. But he ran around and sold everybody in Placerville above-ground burial spots. And these full-body above-ground burials were apparently very popular in the 1970s. And we've got 7 mausoleum buildings in Placerville full of these things. So now they're a nightmare. Let's keep going. Protect. So this is kind of in the wishful thinking arena. Surveillance systems. We don't have any surveillance systems in any of our cemeteries. Other people's cemeteries have surveillance systems. We do not have surveillance systems. If you go in downtown Placerville, you're on 3 or 4 cameras at every moment that you're down there. But there's nothing in this cemetery, which is in the city of Placerville. Improved fencing. Not that fencing keeps the miscreants out, as one meth head famously told me in there. Tweakers know how to use wire cutters too, man. But iron fencing, and I learned this from Virginia City, one of the biggest things they did to protect the cemeteries in Virginia City, they're basically 30 years ahead of us on a lot of stuff. So I looked to places like that to see what direction to go. And they claimed that putting iron fencing up was incredibly important, that vandalism dropped by like 75% after that. Not that people couldn't climb the fence and vandalize, they just didn't. There was a respect thing or something. But we don't have fancy fences. We got a fancy arch, but we don't have fancy fences. We got old chain link fences. Lighting would be nice. Security signage, security patrols. Sorry, Placerville PD, but you won't drive through it at night. No matter how hard I beg and embarrass you in city council meetings, you will not drive through the damn cemetery at night. I don't know why. Increased visitation. Bottom line is, since Save the Graves has gotten in there and started doing stuff, and there's people in there tinkering around with signs or this or that, all these problems have diminished. More people, more visitation, more dog walking, more neighborhood people in there exercising, more joggers, less vandalism. Makes sense. Once you fix the obvious stuff, you guys know about the broken window phenomenon in New York. If they found that if you just fix the broken windows in a neighborhood, it kind of stopped the thing from going down. It actually turned out that the sociologist made up all the data, and so that was all disproven, but I'm going with it anyway, because when a derelict walks in a cemetery at 2 in the morning and sees headstones broken on the ground, they don't think twice about putting some more broken ones on the ground. I know that. So we'll talk about what we do, but we clean headstones, we write headstones, we fix the leaners, they're called. It's actually pretty simple with the old ones. It's just a little shovel and gravel and prying and a level and stamp the gravel in and go do another. So it's something that we can train regular folk to do easily. Leaning headstones tend to get knocked over. Straight ones tend not to. Next. Third part of our mission, celebrate. So event hosting. We have events. We have a kids party in the cemeteries, National Night Out coming up in August. We try to do events in the cemetery to get people in there, to get them exposed to it, to start building those connections. Got to have available expertise, because you go into a cemetery, you got nothing but questions. No matter how many signs and all that stuff, it just is. Anybody that attends a Sierra Renaissance Society meeting and walks into a cemetery is going to have questions. We are curious people. And so there needs to be somebody around that knows something about the cemetery. I do that a lot. I work very, very closely with the county cemetery administrator, Julianne Melker. I'm very fortunate to have a very close working relationship with the county. One or the other of us, or both, try to be at any significant event we do for this purpose. Signage I already talked about. God, we could always have better websites. I'm the wrong one to talk about that. I don't do that good with screens. Really the wrong one to talk about social media, but it totally matters. We know it totally matters. I personally believe Facebook is evil. I won't go on it. I won't look at it. But everybody else seems to, so I understand that it's important, and we need to be better at it. We also need shade, because we're an aging population, and it gets damn hot out there. So for our event, we figured out how to put up really big shade structures. It would be nice to have some stuff that was there all the time. There's not even really good benches. There's no water whatsoever. I continue to try to fix the plumbing out there, and more geysers spout up because it's literally 150 years old. Bathrooms, if we put bathrooms out there, the homeless would be living there. So we can't do that either. And benches also, the county's real worry of anybody putting any benches that you could get too comfortable on in the cemeteries. Sadly, the homeless thing is a separate topic, but it's related. We have had bouts of major homeless inhabitation. Caldor Fire, for example, they moved in. Anyway, right now, it's not bad at all. Cross your fingers. Next. All right, how to accomplish all this stuff? How? Come and talk to the Sierra Renaissance Society. Build coalitions, bring like-minded people together, seek sponsors. I've had to go out and ask people for money a lot. I was not comfortable asking those people for money. I did it anyway, okay? Sometimes it worked. It helped that I was a newspaper reporter and got to know some really influential, cool people during that time, some of which have a few coins to rub together. I have milked those poor suckers dry at this point. Host volunteer projects. These are like El Dorado Hills people too that I don't even know the cemeteries exist up here. And they've come through for us and got us launched. That and a little outfit called the Latrobe Fund, sitting in the back of the room. Provide leadership, service, and volunteer opportunities. Turns out these kids all got to get service hours. So what's that group that just signed up?
The Boys Charity.
The Boys Charity Father and Son Service Club of El Dorado Hills, something, just signed up, and they're going to have a whole day of headstone cleaning coming up in July. So that's exciting. Providing them opportunities. In our event, we also put a whole bunch of kids to work at our event as ushers, helping people through the rough terrain to our ad hoc stages and stuff like that. Research. Well, you hear me talking about one cemetery in particular, Placerville Union, because it's full of interesting people. These are the people that created community in the 1870s and 1880s. They were the leaders. So this is not a pauper cemetery. This is the opposite. This is the fraternal orders of the day, which were, the Masons, the Druids, and some other ones that are lesser known now. They were disgusted with conditions in the other cemeteries in Placerville, so they built a Victorian garden center on B Street. And so there we've got lawyers, doctors, people of influence in this particular cemetery. So we've got no end of interesting people to research, a lot of politicians. We also we end up telling local history stories. These people did things. They were involved in things that were going on. I love to tell the story of the city of Placerville ceasing to exist for 27 years at the end of the 19th century. It was hidden at the time. They were like embarrassed about it. But we couldn't get the railroad here. We lost to the Big Four. The bondholders wanted their money. Back then, you could sue the city council directly, go after them in their house. So the city council resigned. There's no city for 27 years, and there's hardly a word written about it. But there's people in this cemetery that were tied to it, because you research them and you find they're doing all this volunteer work. Why are they volunteering to be the head of the Board of Education for 20 years? Because there was no one else to do it. So it's all tied together. Cemetery lore itself, I've completely geeked out on this. These old headstones were hand carved. They're sculptors. They signed their work. If you look carefully at the bottom, you can find all kinds of signatures. Each one of these guys came out here to dig gold, failed, and went back to what they were doing in the old country, which was carving stone. And so you'll see them. Even in the little out-of-the-way cemeteries way back in the woods, there are those names, one of 5 or 6 names. And so I've gotten to know them and collect them, and I am absolutely the only person interested in that. Host events, I already talked about that. Education, got this going and then got whammed by the pandemic. We were going into the high school, telling stories to the kids, getting them in the cemetery, telling stories to the kids. But now we're relaunching that. And it's great for us because they can do all sorts of stuff for us. There's the metal shop, for example. We need lots of stuff from there. And we also borrow all kinds of stuff from the high school to put on our big event. And soon we'll be back in the classroom. Education, multi-platform. Above all, facilitate and improve the experience for visitors. If it's not interesting, if it's not safe, if it's not enjoyable, people won't give a you-know-what. And so that's what it's all about. Next. Okay. Where do you guys want to go? Here's my top 5 local ones. Nice, safe, easy. No, you're not trespassing to get there. I've been talking about Placerville Union, my home cemetery, the only Victorian garden cemetery. So Victorian garden cemeteries were an East Coast thing mainly, and they made them like parks. This was before parks. This was a park. You'd go there on Sunday and spread out a picnic and have dinner with grandma. Well, she's in the ground, but that's what you did. So that's the way it was. El Dorado Cemetery, right down the road here. Great example of the opposite of a Victorian garden cemetery. It's a country cemetery. It's much more scattered around. A lot of the graves are heavily decorated. There's a lot of Native Americans in there. There's a lot of Hispanics in there who they really, for years and years after a young person dies, they decorate there's plots with probably 300 to 400 pieces of grave leavings, just toys, all kinds of stuff there. And nobody messes with it, we just leave it. There's also some very unusual headstones at El Dorado. The Woodsmen of the World were a fraternal at the time that were basically an insurance company for the lumber guys, who the fatality and injury rate in the lumber business was horrible. And so if you got killed out in the woods and you were a member of the Woodsmen, they would bury you and take care of your family, and you would get a Woodsman marker. And these were actually carved out of stone to look like tree stumps. They're pretty cool. There's one in the county that I found, and it's at El Dorado. The Woodsmen weren't, for some reason, I don't know why, because we had a timber industry here, but they weren't a big presence. Other weird fraternals definitely were. Anyway, it's a delightful place. Diamond Springs, 1,300 feet that way, across the street from Deb's Frosty. Another country cemetery, sadly, very, very, very heavily vandalized over the years. There's maybe 2 or 3% of the headstones left, but there's some very historic graves. The most historic one is in the backyard of an adjoining house, the Taylor's house. And that guy was Carpenter, one of the many Carpenter clans in El Dorado County. But this one had a massive agricultural enterprise in Diamond Springs and also had a brewery and a brandy distillery right there across from Deb's Frosty. That's where he lived. And that's where the cemetery is, in his backyard, basically. And I don't know how the heck his family plot got chopped out of his cemetery, but it did. And nobody's ever done anything about it. Placerville Old City. This one, you know the shoe repair place in Placerville? It kind of looks like a drive-through thing down there in Lower Main where Carol's office used to be. Anyway, straight up above that at the end of a road called Chamberlain Street is Placerville Old City Cemetery. And until about 6 months ago, it was a complete and utter disgrace. This is the place that the fraternals built Union Cemetery because of the conditions in this one in 1870. But we've had this one crazy volunteer named Brian who got into fixing headstones. First, he's a veteran, and first he just did veteran headstone cleaning, and then it was veteran headstone straightening, and then it was veteran headstone repair, and then it's everything. He has fixed easily a dozen beautiful, historic, very, very old headstones, pieces buried in the ground. We'll see some examples later, but my man Brian has done such great work there. Go out there and check it out. Also a club, I did not even know they still exist. Any members of the Emblem Club here? The Emblem Club is like the former Ladies Auxiliary of the Elks. They still exist, and they adopted the cemetery. They don't know anything about headstones. They just wanted to cut the grass and trim the trees, and they've done that. The place, it's been an embarrassment for as long as anybody can remember, and it's beautiful right now. Go, go, go. Federated Church has a beautiful cemetery. Right on the side of it, they are above the Druid Monument, at the bottom of Cedar Ravine. That is a beautiful cemetery on Thompson Way, I think, yes. Although many of the headstones are broken, it's not that big of a cemetery, but it's kind of steep. And my man Brian has missing a fibia. It got put up here to fix something that got cancer, I think, and so he doesn't do so good on this, so he won't go there. Somebody needs to, though. Next. Types of cemeteries. You probably have a general idea before you wander around in these places. The private ones, big examples, St. Patrick's, we were talking about earlier. That's a Catholic cemetery in Placerville affiliated with St. Patrick's Church. They own it, they operate it, they do what they want. Green Valley Mortuary out there, big, big commercial cemetery on Green Valley, beautiful place. Westwood Hills in Placerville, that one's on Cold Springs Road. Another, you know it's private because there's grass and it's green. Also, Ed Bixby, the owner, has gotten into collecting fountains. It's his hobby. He has 13 operating fountains in that cemetery right now. he's also been a major, I shouldn't get into it with that. He's a green burial expert, like nationally, and he happens to live here. He owns 18 or 20, I can't, historic cemeteries all around the world. He's always flying someplace. But he's really knowledgeable, and he's been very, very generous with us, with his knowledge and his labor. So those are private cemeteries. There's lots of little ones, too. The Tong Cemetery, which is in Clarksville behind a gate. Shouldn't have put that up there. Rose Springs, which is in somebody's backyard and rescue. If you knock on their door, they'll actually let you in. White Ranch, another ranch cemetery. Clarksville Cemetery, which is above the movie theater. That you can get to. Last I checked, the best way to get there was up through the church. There's a church adjacent to it, and you could park in their upper parking lot. Very historic. Bryant Cemetery out in Latrobe is private. They don't want to be private, they want to be public, but they are not public. And Durock House in Cameron Park, which is right behind Burke's Junction. All on private property. So how does this happen? Back in the day, ranch families buried people in the backyard, and then they sold the ranch and the cemetery went with it. What should have happened is they should have split and created a separate cemetery parcel so that it could be adopted by a nonprofit or a trust or somebody and maintained, but they didn't do that because it was too much work, and after about 1975 it was actually expensive and difficult to do it. So you should probably just stick to the public cemeteries for starters. El Dorado, Diamond Springs, Placerville Union, St. Michael's, that's a fun one. Former Catholic church that everyone forgot about in Cameron Park. It's off of Green Valley Road, just about a block, I guess, a big block west of Starbuck. Starbuck is the continuation of Cameron Park Drive. And in there is a gated up, beautiful old cemetery with the Zentgraf family in it. Zentgraf is a very historically significant family. Their house is perhaps the oldest standing structure in El Dorado County on Deer Valley Road, rammed earth, original, mint condition, never messed up, never remodeled, with the family winery in the same condition right across the road. Can't miss it. They're right up against the road, way too close. So anyway, St. Michael's, everybody forgot about it. The Catholics forgot about it. The church closed in the 1800s. Catholics forgot about it. County forgot about it. They authorized a subdivision on top of it. It got half built, and one of my predecessors, a woman named, a very acerbic woman named Sue Silver, got wind of it, reminded the Catholic Church of this, and they promptly sued El Dorado County and won. And the settlement was that El Dorado County has to maintain that as a public cemetery in perpetuity. They don't, but that was the settlement. I, however, have been out there and have done lots of stuff, and the place looks okay now. Because I'm a friend of a Zentgraf descendant, and he's elderly and sends Save the Graves a check every year. And so I go out and fix his family cemetery for him. 2 of them, in fact. But it's an interesting place, and you can look through the gates. And if you ask me nice, I'll tell you the combination. Latrobe is a public cemetery, but you got to go through gates to get to it, so it's kind of hard to find. Shingle Springs is an easy one. It's right behind the train station diner in Shingle Springs. You guys know where that is on Motherlode Drive? Greasy diner there. If you go around behind it, there's a public cemetery. And there's a total of 18. The county is, and the term used is manages 18 cemeteries. Manages means bare minimum maintenance, and if there's a threat to public safety, they intervene, meaning there's a dangling tree branch or something. But they don't do any, they don't fix up stuff, and most of their landscape maintenance is historically been spraying poison on the ground to keep anything from growing, because spraying poison is cheaper than weed whipping. So that is what the public cemetery situation is. The county never started any of these cemeteries. They didn't want them. They don't want them now. They don't want to be in this business at all. But what happens is, by California state law, when a cemetery is abandoned by its owner, the land use authority must step up and be responsible for it. So since we have very few cities in El Dorado County, just 2, so most of these cemeteries are in the county. The county is the land use authority, and they inherit about a cemetery every 2 years. As families that are still maintaining their cemeteries start to age out and move away, more and more of these over the years will become county cemeteries, and we have no dedicated funding for that. That's the next slide. So let's talk about association-owned. Early on in California law, they made a provision so you can form a cemetery association, Rural Cemetery Association. George Turnbull is a member of one, and he's very, very proud of it. If you've heard George for more than 5 minutes, you've probably heard about it. And he should be proud of it. His little Frenchtown cemetery it looks good. They maintain it. You can't be buried in there if you're not a member of the association or married into it or something. I forget what the rules are, but they can make their own rules. And so everybody that's a member of the association has to pay some money every year. I don't know, a couple $100 maybe. Jayhawk Cemetery, same thing. The Wing family in rescue is very dominant in that, but it's an association and it's doing good. The cemetery looks great. I was just out there a couple weeks ago. Pleasant Valley, out there, turn right where the supermarket is and turn right again, and you get up to a beautiful little country cemetery on a hilltop, Pleasant Valley Cemetery. They got an association. Who knew? Yeah, that's all the ones there are. There was others, but they've died out. Oh, Oak Hill. Right up the road here on the left, about 5 minutes outside of Diamond Springs on the left, you'll notice Oak Hill Cemetery. They got an association. So the other way to fund these things, and the way pretty much the rest of the world does it, is by creating a California special district. It's like a park district or a utility district. And that means, what this means in California is that they can get a little piece of that precious property tax. So in other places, people pay $8 a year, $6 a year, $12 a year on their parcel tax, and the cemeteries are maintained out of that fund. There is one in Kelsey. It was created in 1930 something, did he tell us? He said, tell us this, it generates like $5,000 a year total. Yeah, which is not enough to maintain Kelsey Cemetery, but it's something. And then there's volunteers and people that care about Kelsey, and they come out and they got a $5,000 head start every year. The bottom line is Kelsey Cemetery is something to be proud of. Georgetown has something called a zone of benefit, which is a cheater special district. You can do it when your special district for $9 a year fails because any tax increase is evil. Then you go back and you try for a zone of benefit for $5 a year. And what zone of benefit does is now, instead of having a governing board for the cemetery that decides how to spend, whatever the pittance is that this money generates, you've just got an advisory committee, and it's still the county's responsibility. So the county still has to do basically all the work and listen to an advisory committee. And anyway, it's something. We tried. I was the chair of the county cemetery advisory committee, and we tried creating a district-wide, they called it. It was county-wide zone of benefit. The Board of Supervisors actually created it, but they can't fund it. It has to be an initiative with a 2/3 vote to approve, and we were going for $9 a year. And also as a member of the Cemetery Advisory Committee, I was not allowed to advocate for it. So there was no stakeholders whatsoever. And I talked to the Taxpayers Association twice on 2 different occasions, and it was very clear that we were just going to get crucified. So we yanked it. It never went. It was going to cost $35,000 to put it on the ballot, and our chances of success were like 0. So I had them pull it. So that's the story on those things. Typically, special districts were formed back before all the, back in the 50s and 60s and 40s and 30s is when these things were formed. And if they had an escalator clause in it, those districts are still pretty good. If, like Kelsey, they didn't even think about it back in 1938, they got something, but it's not enough. Next. Sorry to bore you with that, but nobody knows it. See, they suggested this really cool format after I put my tired old format up there, so I just went with it. Funding old cemeteries. So there's grass so long you can't see the headstones. Broken headstones. Next. All right, save the graves. What we do. We have a big theater event. Some people think that's all we are. It's not. Our mission is fixing stuff and improving things. The theater event is a vehicle. But it's a pretty good one, and it's gotten really popular. Everybody loves it, at least everybody that talks to me. We also sponsor cemetery improvement projects, great and small. The one thing that really bugged the heck out of me that I was able to address first year was there was all these beautiful old headstones laying on the ground in pieces. And there were pieces, this old marble is light. It's not like granite. It doesn't hold up forever. So you could just pick these up and carry them into your garden and use them for garden steps. And people would. And so we got 18 of them up off the ground. We didn't know the right conservation restoration techniques and fancy expensive epoxies to use to glue them back together right. So the guys at Westwood Hills, one of them has a kind of a welding metal shop in his garage. He built custom brackets for all 18 of them. And we stood them up with just dabs of epoxy, called it a temporary solution so we didn't offend the archaeologist, and got them up off the ground. And I'm pleased about that. And we've gone on from there. Now we don't use the brackets anymore. We've now, thanks to Brian, learned how to do it right, basically. One day we'll take the brackets off and do those right, but there's thousands of other broken ones still laying on the ground in other cemeteries that we're going to clean up first. Cemetery improvement projects, great and small. Projects. Today, the mausoleum painting should be wrapped up. Now, I told you we don't like to do maintenance. Painting sounds like maintenance, doesn't it? Well, it sort of is, but if the county went to bid for painting those mausoleums, it was going to come in at $20,000 if it was going to be a penny. The Placerville Cannabis Benefit Fund gave us $5,000. It was their first $5,000 grant, and they gave it to us. I was so touched. We got a local boy, local painting company, Hangtown Painting, Bobby, to do all those mausoleums for $5,000. And so yeah, we broke our rule and we did a little maintenance there. But the paint spot, Grace at the paint spot, love Grace. She donated all the paint. And it's also a stepping stone towards murals. These mausoleums, they have well, they're called crypt shutters on one side. Don't have any good pictures of them here, but the other side is just a big blank wall. And it'll be like 30, 40 feet long wall, 20 feet tall, not 20, 12 feet tall. Murals. We can put murals, you know, you go to these old towns and they've got all the famous old people there, you know, and like the WPA murals type of thing is what I envision, not some exotic art project. But so that's on the horizon, but we had to get these flaking mausoleums fixed first, painted first. We do volunteer group projects. I've talked about that. Cemetery walking and driving tours. Already this year we've done, what was it, the little-known Placerville Cemeteries driving tour. So in January, I took a little caravan around on these tiny little roads that nobody knew existed to tiny little cemeteries nobody knew existed. And it was pretty cool, I thought. We just did the North County Cemetery crawl, and that was Greenwood, Spanish Dry Diggins, and Kelsey. And then coming up next month, we've got the North County Cemetery crawl. South County, north, south, it's all the same. Anyway, it's going to be Diamond Springs, and then we're going to Fairplay, and then to a really interesting place called Indian Diggins, which is you go to Omo Ranch and turn right and drive for a half hour on bad roads, and you come to the first marble quarry in California. A whole town built up around this thing. And when they died out there, they had some really big monuments, and so all that's left is the cemetery. And a lot of people are curious about it, but don't know how to get there. So we're going to go. And then, so that's the kind of tours we do. Walking tours. I just, over Mother's Day, I did Women of Union Cemetery tour. Just walked around for 3 hours and talked about 18, 20 interesting women that are buried there. And it's a challenge because women get slighted in history. They're slighted in the cemetery. You'll see, John Smith and Mrs. John Smith. They don't even put her name on a headstone. I mean, come on. No respect whatsoever. And the same thing in history. Everything's recorded under the guys. So you really have to dig to find the information on the women. And we got some amazing ones. We've got this pioneering suffragette. I mean, she was like the first one at the first West Coast suffragette march, way out front. Remember Jan? Anyway, she came and helped. Other cemetery events and activities, fundraising, begging for money all the time. Last time I was here, I was begging for money from the Lions. But how do you say no to me, right? So we get small sponsorships from local service groups, and then of course I beat up all the local guys on Main Street, Placerville, and they come through every year because they're good people. So shop at Placerville Hardware, shop at Dennis Thomas's drugstore. They support us. Making connections, growing community. I think I beat that into the ground enough. All right, just some pictures. Here's headstone cleaning. Kids, there's a Raffetto. You guys know who that was, what? They had the Carey House. They're still around. Kurt Raffetto and Dano is still around. Cleaning veteran headstones. We took a grant from the veterans this year and committed to way too much veterans work. But that's okay. Michelle's all over it. Next. These are two examples of headstone cleaning. So the cleaning is really relevant, not so much for the modern granite headstones. It's all about the old marble ones. Those dull white ones that you see, you think they're limestone or something. They are limestone, but it's marble. And it's just not a hard rock. It's not like granite. And lichen attacks it. It grows on it and eats it up. It gets on the face, and especially the lower quality marble. There was a wide range of qualities of marbles that ends up in headstones. Lower quality, we've got headstones where the face is completely, we don't know what it says anymore. It's gone. And so the solution is, this is all VA approved. I didn't make this up. Expensive biological cleaner called D2, $60 a gallon. And lots of water and soft brushes and kids. And so before and after. This stuff is so amazing that you can spray it on and not touch anything. We don't. We want to see results, so we help it. And then we put on another coat before we walk away. But it continues to brighten the headstone even after you leave. It continues to work for months, actually. Here's a couple of examples. Next. This is just a picture of the LDS Day of Giving. They were just all over the place. I still get goose flesh just looking at this picture. It was so beautiful. Next. This guy's Jack. He's quadriplegic. This is the second year in a row he's come out. He was out at El Dorado. He had like a rake wedged up against. He's got the partial use of one hand, and he was raking off this grave when I first met him, and he told me his story. Jack was a local boy. He went to high school at El Dorado, and he dove in the pool and hit the bottom with his head. And he's been paralyzed ever since. Is that me? Anyway, here he is. We were straightening headstones, and we needed some gravel to, you lift up the downside, and you stuff gravel under there, and you tamp it, remember? So we needed to transport the gravel, and Jack was transporting it with the help of that kid. He's just a bright light. Next. This is our capital equipment for headstone cleaning. This is supposed to be a joke. Anyway, next. Brian, my man. A simple level up. So he's straightening this one. Brian lives in Sacramento. He drives up here 2 to 3 times a week to do this work. He's all by himself. He needs help. He needs a helper. Not all the time, just once in a while on the really heavy ones. When he's got this block and chain thing, but you got to have one guy lowering the chain and another guy setting it in the expensive, smooshy epoxy. Next, headstone repair. This one, Placerville City Cemetery, he found it by probing. And we found almost all the pieces. We're missing a chunk about that big. There's actually a conservation restoration technique for this. There's a certain resin you use, and then you can carve in the missing letters, and it's all being done. So here you see after he got, a week later, when he got all the pieces up on the table, go on. Here's a fix of a leaner. Left, it's leaning. Right, it's straightened. Next. So this guy, he was with the Emblem Club, and he's the husband. And I told him that there's headstones that are still underground here. You know, I mean, you poke around, you'll find one. He found one, 1860 stone. He was so stoked. So here it is after it got scraped off. It's Stephen and Samuel Fuller, and you can't really see it, but it's broken right there, right between their names. Next. And so Brian fixed it. The first step was to clean the pieces and then create a base, which is completely underground there, and then sink this thing in the base and let these epoxies take like weeks to dry. Everything, all these steps are at least a week apart. And then later on, he came back and epoxied Stephen on top of Samuel. So that's the finished product out there today. Pretty cool. Next. Cemetery tours we already talked about. This is the women and then interpretive signs. Here's some examples. So Oddfellows, in addition to geeking out on all the guys that carved the headstones, the symbols on them in this era are significant. They mean stuff, especially in the fraternal sections. So the Masons had all their own symbols, and the Oddfellows had all their own symbols, and they stole some of the Mason symbols, and the Druids have even weirder symbols, and on it goes. And they're on the headstones. So if you want to geek out, you can do so. And I don't know if you noticed this, Michelle, but this is an Oddfellow symbol, and it's Archie Bosquet. He's the sheriff who I'm writing the script for the Manzanita Hill thing. And Archie's got a great story anyway. He was a loyal Oddfellow, so he leaves he leaves some money, his estate, to the Oddfellows. They got $5,000 or $6,000 back then. You know, it's a lot of money, and some land. They sell off the local stuff, but there's this worthless piece in Texas. They never. Its appraised value is literally zero, so they don't do anything with it. It's there. Then last year, they need a new roof on that Oddfellow building in Placerville, you know, right next to the courthouse. A lot of money. They're a small, struggling group. Somebody says, we just got this letter from a real estate broker in Texas that wants to give us the $5,000 for that worthless piece of land. Time out, do a little research. It's oil. So they've made way more than $5,000 with residuals. Now the Oddfellows are healthy. They've restored the spring-loaded dance floor on the second floor. Some of you might have ever been in it a long time ago. It was really run down and sad in recent years. It's back. What they don't have is ADA access to the second floor, which is really 1.5 stories up because the first floor is so darn tall. So without strapping a column, you know, a $100,000 column on the outside of that building and putting in an elevator, they got no way to use easily the most magnificent historic room in El Dorado County. The dance floor, for those of you who don't know, this dance floor is huge. It's like this size and it's spring loaded. This thing is a freaking trampoline. I mean, and there's nothing going on up there. brand new PA, microphones and all this stuff. Nothing going on. Next. A vision. Honor the dead, inform the living, build stronger communities. Fences, parking, signage, walkways, benches, handrails, signage. Cops that will go in the place. Historic monuments repaired and maintained. Landscaping, terrain, welcoming. Green burials facilitated and created. Green burials don't take up much space. That's how Ed Booksby at Westwood Hills has all these, he's taken over all these historic cemeteries around the world. People just give them to him. Their money, they're like, oh, this place is out of control. He cleans it up. He finds somebody local to do the burials, and he tucks in green burials around the edges and gives just enough cash flow to keep these beautiful old cemeteries and out-of-the-way places going.
What's a green burial?
A green burial is a broad great question. Broad category of techniques of burial that have, the only real thing they have in common is they don't fill you full of formaldehyde. So you can have a more or less green burial even in a casket. Typically, they don't. You can go out to Westwood Hills and buy bamboo caskets, things that decompose easily. Michelle here wants to be buried, she wants to be thrown in the hole and then a mushroom shroud placed on her to grow on her. That's actually a thing, she didn't make it up. Most people these days get incinerated. I won't use the other word, it's really incinerated, and it's really, really environmentally intensive because there's a lot of moisture in a human body, especially this one, and it takes a lot of time and energy to burn you up. You can just throw me in the hole and let me rot. That's a green burial. And there's all sorts of variations, and people are dressing it up and injecting you into trees and all kinds of stuff. It's kind of contrived. But bottom line is there's lots of ways to do it without taking up big 6-foot, long spaces. Open spaces facilitate public events in our cemeteries. We've got county-managed cemeteries with big vacant lots next door, but it costs money to zone it as a cemetery and prep it to sell those plots, so we don't do that. Even though you could then sell plots in the historic cemetery without messing with the historic cemetery right over here. So at Mormon Island and also at Pilot Hill, people that came before us had the foresight to buy adjacent parcels for that purpose. It's not happening. We have this big event in Placerville Union Cemetery. There's no place to do anything. We have a limited number of exhibitors because there's just no place to put the booths. The place is stuffed full of graves. It's hard. The audience for our performances, you're sitting among headstones. The audience area is in headstone land. So other places that do this, and the East Coast, it's way different. They think about all this stuff, and they're way better at it, and they respect these places way more than we do. All the big cemeteries have patio areas and places where you can do events. Driving and walking tours are held regularly. If you've never been down, the best one in the area and where I learned so much is in Sacramento at Sacramento Old City Cemetery on Broadway. They do amazing factual tours. They even do a ghost thing in October. I refuse to go there, but people want it, so I should, but I won't. And if you want to see a great cemetery tour, look on their website. What is it? The Old City Cemetery? SOCC, something anyway. And our websites are lacking. Civic groups, as well as high schools, should be engaged, helping us to do all of this stuff. Again, that's the way it works in other places. The Mormons, God bless them, are doing it, but they do have numbers that a lot of smaller churches don't have right now. That place is a hive of activity on Sundays, and they got a full genealogy center in there. It's amazing. They're doing all kinds of work for us, for the veterans. We committed to replacing any veteran that does not have a headstone in Union Cemetery. There's like 6,000 burials out there. We committed to putting a veteran marker on there this year. So that meant they all had to be looked up, and we couldn't do that. they have been doing it. 6,000. That's a lot of lookups. Local history groups. We got some great historians here. History people, though, man, we are so weird. We're just not public-facing, great at the public-facing stuff normally. But boy, El Dorado County, we've got some amazing people that know so much. They just need to be handled properly and recognized, and they'll do a lot more for us. Keep going, Michelle. Okay, what do we got coming up? Whoa, look at that. Tomorrow, 9 in the morning, I can clean headstones in Placerville Union Cemetery. Wow. There's already 3 people signed up. Plenty of space. South County Cemetery Crawl on the 20th. Details there. I already talked about it. Headstone repair assistance. Anybody that would like to help out Brian once or twice a week, the man needs a hand for a half hour. I have been trying for a month to find somebody. Every single person, all my friends that I've recommended have flaked out. Every single one of them has flaked out. So contact me and I'll set you up with Brian. You'll love him. National Night Out. You know what that is? The big kids party, ostensibly hosted by the police. I think, by the way, I got a call from the Kiwanis today. I think they're going to partner with us on it. So that's cool. They've done it forever, but never started again after the pandemic. So we'll be having kids in the cemetery. Again, just trying to get them exposed to it. Last year we did a scavenger hunt, some gravestone rubbing, and gold panning. And then the big event I've been talking about is on the 19th. Volunteer positions available for that. And I think that's my presentation. Thank you. Question?
I have a question. I've loved all of your events, and I walk the Placerville Cemetery almost every day or every other day. But I also walk Myrtle Street, and there's a little cemetery on Myrtle Street that
Yeah.
you didn't mention, and I've always heard it referred to as the Jewish cemetery.
Right.
Can you share more information about that?
You're going to be disappointed. It's the Jewish cemetery. Oh, the question is, there's a little cemetery, for those of you that know Placerville, Canal Street is in a fairly steep canyon. And on the west side of that canyon, at the top, is a street called Myrtle Street. And there, right near the freeway, just above it, more or less, is a tiny little Jewish cemetery. And we have the one family of note in there is the Schnell family. Schnell? Snow, the Snow family. Sorry. But there's beautiful Yiddish headstones, some weird symbols that I don't know what are, and some, we have friends that live across the street that are Jewish, and they've actually looked up the sayings and told us, but I don't know what they are. But it's a beautiful thing, and the Jews have I don't know, some type of a cemetery organization, and they have about a half a dozen pioneer Jewish cemeteries running from like Calaveras County up to Placer County, all in the foothills, and they're taking care of them. And they don't want us in there messing with anything. They've got it. The cemetery, for years they kept it locked, and the combination was 1848. They no longer lock it. I wonder why. So it's open. Anybody can go in and enjoy it. It's a pretty place. It's small. It's.
But is there any way of finding out any of the history of anybody there?
That organization has been, they had a really great guy in Garden Valley that was really responsive, and he died, and whoever inherited it now has been distinctly unfriendly to anybody who's contacted him. I think he's just protective. He doesn't want, because our friends moved in there and they wanted to take care of it. They wanted to adopt it. They live right across the street, and they're Jewish. And yet, keep your hands off our cemetery. So you could try, but they, and I haven't, quite honestly. I don't need to know anything more about it. The only little bit of interesting history that I have about the synagogue that was in Placerville is Placerville has been subject to a few bizarre weather events over the years, like tornado, cyclone events. One struck out in rescue and rearranged some buildings. That was pretty well written in the Vierkamp family history. And another one took the synagogue, apparently lifted the roof right off it and took it away. And I guess they never rebuilt after that. But my understanding of where the synagogue was is that it wasn't right there on Myrtle Street. It was actually slightly farther east, so I've never really understood why the cemetery is there on Myrtle Street.
You know, Find a Grave?
Everything's on. You guys know about Find a Grave? Find a Grave is a website and an app that originally had information about some cemeteries and some burials, and now has information about pretty much all of them. The contributors have gotten down and posted all sorts of information, not just pictures of graves, but backstories of people and of cemeteries. So it's worth looking on findagrave.org. That's what we do. Even walking around cemeteries, we know we're oftentimes one hand on Find a Grave, because a lot of the weird researcher history types I mentioned, they like staying at home and posting stuff on places like Find a Grave. They don't like to go out and talk to other human beings so much. So it's just loaded up with high quality stuff, you know, pictures of obituaries and all sorts of stuff. Any other questions? All right, I'm around. We got a map that's got a lot of but not all of the cemeteries is over here. If anybody has one they've been wondering about, I'm available.